Stop what you're doing just for a second. Take a breath with me. There's so much to do in private practice and so many resources and trainings and things like that to focus on that we've brought it all together for you for a totally free event starting March 11th and going till March 14th. Level Up Week 2024 is coming up, and I want you to save that date. We have some amazing panels we're planning where we're bringing together people that have started a private practice, people that have started a group practice, and people that are rocking out mega group practices. Also, we're going to have some amazing keynotes and some trainings that are on very practical things. There's no need for you to bounce between Facebook groups wondering, is this advice good? What should I do next? I don't even know of the 50 things that I need to be working on what I should do first. Instead, come to Level Up Week. It's totally free. You can be on the early bird list over at practiceofthepractice.com/level up to get all the early notifications for when we open up registration. So again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/level up. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 961. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. Level Up Week is right around the corner. It kicks off in just a couple days on March 11th. Now, Level Up Week is when we do a ton of amazing webinars all about leveling up in private practice. So on Monday, we're going to be having a panel all with solo practitioners that have been leveling up in a variety of different ways. We're going to have panels for people that have gone from a solo to their very first hire in their group, so starting a group. And then we're also going to have panels that are specifically on how to grow a group practice. So no matter your phase of practice, we have panels, we have trainings, we have marketing, all sorts of amazing things. We even have psychedelic assisted therapy, going to be doing a training on that as well. So you can head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/level up to sign up for Level Up Week. This is one of our biggest events of the year. You're not going to want to miss it. And if you want to have access to those recordings for that week after, you're going to want to sign up. So again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/level up. Well, I am so excited today to talk with Olly Richards. Olly had a series of random careers, from jazz musician to English teacher, before eventually starting a blog on his passion, language learning, and growing it into a $10 million online business. Today, he writes a newsletter at ollyrichards.co, teaching other online entrepreneurs how to scale their businesses to 7 figures using story learning as a living case study. Olly, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the nice intro, and it's great to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, I love talking with people that are in similar but different fields because, to just learn from folks that aren't just in the clinical space, to me, it just adds so much to it. So you're a jazz musician, English teacher. Just tell me about that world.
Yeah, they're all crazy worlds. There's lots of different worlds out there, and I've been through quite a few of them on the road to where I am now. So, my kind of start in life was as a musician. I've been playing the piano, classical piano, since I was about 6 years old. Then discovered jazz one rainy afternoon when I was about 16. Fell head over heels in love with it, and I decided to go to a music college in London to do a degree in jazz piano performance, which was loads of fun. But I ended up kind of falling out of love with it a number of years later, because I think I loved the music, but the lifestyle wasn't really for me. It's a very particular lifestyle, jazz musician. It's everything you imagine it is. And so I ended up drifting away from that. It took me a while to accept that the thing I just spent the last 7 years doing was not what I wanted to do anymore. It's a difficult thing to reckon with. So I kind of drifted for a few years and then decided to go and do something fun with my life. So I trained as an English teacher and I flew to Japan and lived there for 4 years teaching English. Then I went to the Middle East for a few years, to Qatar, to Egypt. I'm still teaching and managing teachers and things like that. So that was my second career. And then towards the end of that, I decided to start blogging about the passion that I'd always had in the background, which was learning languages. I've always been a language learner, very keen language learner. I've taught myself 8 languages, and I just started blogging about that. I think because I felt the lack of some kind of creative output. You know, I was working a desk job by then in a language school, and I just felt the need to create. So I started blogging about language learning and did that for 2 years in the background whilst I was working as a teacher manager. And then in 2015, which was about 2 years into my kind of blogging journey, I quit and went full time and moved back to the UK when my daughter was born. And then for the last 7 years or so, 7, 8 years, have been running that business full time. And it's that blog which has turned into a whole language learning company, publisher, etc., and has grown to a fairly well established business today.
Yeah. Wow. I want to go back to when you were making that jump into online learning. I know a ton of therapists are asking me about, I have a great specialty in trauma, or like even one of my consulting clients I right before this was talking with is a specialist in chronic disease in young people. So like Crohn's disease or type 1 diabetes. For people like that have a highly specialized way that they work, that they're helping people clinically, what would you say at the very beginning, if you go back to when you were first starting out, what should they be thinking about? What could they be doing to level up beyond just their practice?
So one of the things that you get told very early on when you start to educate yourself about um, quote unquote online business is that you have to have a niche of some kind. And this message was kind of hammered into me by all the people that I learned from back at the beginning. So I was writing about language learning, which is very broad. And people would tell me, "Oh, you have to have a niche." So what's that? Do you want that niche to be? And I used to think of so many different options. You know, I could niche down to one language. I could just teach Spanish, for example. But then I didn't really want to do that because I enjoyed talking about language learning from a kind of meta perspective. How to learn languages. And I ignored that advice, and a lot of people do ignore that advice. And it was only many, many, many years later that I actually finally niched down into what we do today, which is teaching languages through stories. So it's a very specific methodology. And it was once I niched down into that the business really took off, because everyone out there who would find us, who was frustrated with failed attempts to learn Spanish or whatever it may be, when they came across us and saw, okay, now I can learn Spanish through stories. That's like, wow, that's something different. That's something new, and it got their attention, and that was what really was the catalyst for us to grow. So, as it relates to your question,
Wait, I want to ask a question before you dive into that.
yeah, okay,
How did you figure out that people learned better through story? And like that seems like a shift. Like usually when you think about language learning, it's like hola, ¿cómo está? Like very basic, like
yeah.
greetings, and like how do I order a pizza and get a coffee? Like how did that click for you?
Well, ultimately, it was because I spent so many years learning languages myself, and I taught languages for many years as well as an English teacher. I had a very broad understanding of the language learning world, and so I was familiar with all different ways of thinking about learning and teaching languages. So that so what in practice what I did was experiment with many different things. You know, I used to talk a lot about how to get confident at speaking with other people on the street, for example. And then one of the many experiments that I ran was I started to publish a series of books of short stories, so that if you had basic Spanish, for example, you could read these short stories that were written in Spanish but at a kind of easy level, and people absolutely loved them because it was the first time they'd been able to actually read anything in Spanish. And so I was kind of following the signals that cropped up. And when I had always learned languages by reading myself, but then I noticed that people really liked these short stories that we were putting out. So then I started to think, um, okay, well, one of the big rules of business is do more of what's already working. So when I saw that every time I mentioned stories or did anything with stories, it would strike a nerve with people, I just lent into it and did a lot more of it. So it was a kind of a combination of what I knew to be effective from my experience, plus watching what worked out in the real world.
Yeah, I think that's so important to watch what's working. So frequently, people, at least that I work with, they're highly trained. They're like, I know this is the best practice, and they have some kind of creative side where they're like, this is my art, and it's like, but nobody's buying it. So
Yeah.
let's look at what people actually care about. Like actually recently, I created for a bunch of my consulting clients this wage calculator where you could put in if you pay somebody a W-2 clinician $80,000 a year. They see X number of sessions, this number of weeks. Like, what's your profit margin based on all your expenses? And to me, it was just like basic math that for me comes very easy. And for a lot of people, I realized it doesn't. And it was kind of that whole beginner's mind of just knowing how to run your numbers. And people loved it. And so now I'm like, okay, I need to make more of these calculators that to me feel so basic and easy, but for a lot of people aren't. It's not. So I love that idea of going back to what's working and what gets traction. After that, how did things continue to? Oh, actually, you were about to answer the question around then, correlating that with how clinicians can think.
Yeah, exactly. Because the point of telling that story around stories in my case was to show that the more specific you get, the easier it is to find traction in the early stage of a business. And the reason is that there is so much noise out there, that you can find just in the therapy world. You can find so much information out there that by trying to appeal to everybody, you end up just getting lost in the red ocean, as it were. And so, what generally the best way to think is to really lean into a speciality of some kind, and to not be afraid of talking about something very specific, because that's the thing that will ultimately get you noticed. You may have a competitor who offers 10 different types of therapy, and that's great. But if you then just go and offer specialize in one of those areas, what happens is that when your ideal customer is is out there looking for help, when they come across you and they notice that you specialize in this thing and this one thing only, they are going to be far more inclined to want to work with you than someone who does a bit of everything. It's just like, if you ever want to go out for sushi, and you get these kind of Asian restaurants where they do Thai food and they do Chinese food and they do sushi. You kind of know it's not going to be very good, but then next door you've got a restaurant that just does sushi. Which one do you choose? So it's really, really beneficial to lean into a particular speciality or a particular thing that you and only you can do well.
Yeah. Yeah. So when people are thinking through that, you're saying definitely figure out a specialty. Then where should they go with it after that?
So there's two answers to this, right? And there's the kind of technical answer, and then there's the reality. Now, the technical answer, and this is what you tend to get on business courses and things like that, is to go away and research the market. So you find out, you do a lot of competitor research, find out who's doing what, and then ideally you will find a gap. You will find something that other people aren't servicing or are not servicing very well, and then you can aim to dominate that space. So, for example, if you let's say that you work in the realm of speech therapy, and when you look out there are not many people who are working with speech therapy. I'm sure there are in reality, but just for the sake of the example, or maybe there's lots of people doing it, but they're just not doing it very well, or they're combining it with lots of other things. Then you might decide, okay, with my experience, I can go out there, specialize in speech therapy, build an entire brand around it, and do nothing else. That is your kind of gap in the market type approach. And that's always worth doing. The trouble is that a lot of the time when you first get started in business, you don't have a lot of business skills or business knowledge. And we're always working in a knowledge deficit at the beginning. And I think this is where the theory kind of falls apart and the reality sinks in. You can study business, you can take courses, you can be taught, but it takes so many years to develop the various peripheral skills around business. whether that is finding customers, whether it's copywriting, whether it's learning to present an offer, whether it's delivering a product or a service. It takes so many years to learn these things that really the best approaches, or I should say, the people who tend to do well over the long term are people who take action, have a bias towards taking action, trying things out, getting started, even with imperfect information, and just being kind of very aware and experimenting. So this is exactly what I did with in the language learning space with stories. It took me many years before I even got my first hint of this, and many more years until I actually rebranded my whole business into story learning. So, but even though it took time, it ended up being a very powerful way of doing it because I was in contact with reality the whole time. I was out there doing business, actually selling in the real world. And so, I, while it's great to do market research and it's great to learn as much as you can, the most important thing by far is to get started with your best guess and then try to adopt a mindset of constantly learning, constantly iterating, constantly improving, because the best businesses are built slowly and patiently over a period of many years.
Mm. Stop what you're doing just for a second. Take a breath with me. There's so much to do in private practice and so many resources and trainings and things like that to focus on that we've brought it all together for you for a totally free event starting March 11th and going till March 14th. Level Up Week 2024 is coming up, and I want you to save that date. We have some amazing panels we're planning where we're bringing together people that have started a private practice, people that have started a group practice, and people that are rocking out mega group practices. Also, we're going to have some amazing keynotes and some trainings that are on very practical things. There's no need for you to bounce between Facebook groups wondering, is this advice good? What should I do next? I don't even know of the 50 things that I need to be working on what I should do first. Instead, come to Level Up Week. It's totally free. You can be on the early bird list over at practiceofthepractice.com/level up to get all the early notifications for when we open up registration. So again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/level up. Now, I've a number of consulting clients that things have kind of taken off in their passive income. It's not their main source of income, but they, maybe they're, making six figures with, online courses or consulting or, a podcast. What differentiates someone who's at six figures or low multiple six figures from getting to that seven figures?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, what's really interesting about revenue ranges with online businesses, but in particular, is that everyone ends up facing the same kind of challenges. And it's quite predictable the challenges that someone will run into at, say, 100 or 200,000 in revenue versus low seven figures in revenue. So within the six-figure bracket, there is a big difference between a business that's doing 100K and, say, 8 or 900K. There are different stages of maturity. So let's start with a business that's in the low six-figure range. So typically, this is someone who has just got traction in some way. They're doing something, it's working, they're making money. And so they've done the most difficult thing of all, which is actually to create something in the world. Most people, 99.9% of people fail at this first hurdle. They never get anything started. Someone who's making their first six figures has done that by far the hardest thing of all. And then the psychology at this point is that this person is thinking, well, I feel incredibly grateful because I've managed to, create something that's mine, and I feel a great sense of accomplishment for this. But at the same time, it's not particularly stable because you're making good money, but you may have a certain level of expenditure. You're probably doing a huge amount of work yourself, and so while you feel very proud of what you've achieved, you also know that it could all go away very easily for a number of different reasons. So you feel proud, but you don't feel particularly stable. And so what I see a lot of people doing at this stage is they start to diversify like mad. They start to do loads of different things. So they might start to do, add an Instagram or Facebook or a podcast or something like this. And then they think, okay, well, maybe if I build 2 or 3 new revenue streams, then that will help. And what they try to do is make up for the fact that they feel in quite a precarious position by adding lots more stuff. The trouble with that is that it doesn't scale. And so what happens later is you've got someone who's got 2 or 3 traffic sources, 2 or 3 different product lines. And because entrepreneurs tend to be very tenacious people, they can hold it together for quite a while. So I often meet people who are in the mid or high 6-figure range, who are, incredibly talented, hardworking, and they're making really good money. But under the hood, behind the scenes, things are completely chaotic because they're trying to do all of these different things and hold them together. So what happens normally then is the way for someone to, when they get to that high 6-figure range, what they need to do in order to get to a 7-figure level is actually strip back loads of stuff. Go from, trying to do 3 or 4 different traffic sources to in a kind of half-hearted way to doing 1 or 2 really well. Taking your 4 or 5 product lines, looking at which ones are really performing, which ones aren't, and cutting everything else. Because that same complexity that's managed to get you to managed to help you kind of hack revenue together from lots of different areas is exactly the same thing that stops you scaling. So simplicity scales, complexity fails always. So to bring it back to the entrepreneur low 6-figure level, by far the most important thing to do, rather than adding on lots and lots of new things, is just to get a lot better at the things that have made them successful in the first place. So if, for example, a practitioner has managed to get to 6 figures with a podcast and a consulting practice only, one traffic source and one product line, then rather than adding on new things, the best thing to do is just to double down on those things and ask, right, how can I become an even better podcaster? How can I develop this product line into something that generates even more revenue, perhaps adding a back end of some kind to increase our customer lifetime value, something like that. Doing a lot more of the things that are working and doing it a lot better, all the way up to the 7-figure mark. After you get to 7 figures, that's the time when it becomes important to diversify, because at that point you've got traction, you've got a really good ongoing concern, and you've got something to protect, but not until that point.
Now, I often have heard that, 20% gives you the 80%, in lots of different areas. When someone's at that level and they're growing, how do you think they should think through figuring out the things that are working? Because oftentimes it feels like, well, this part of the business is working pretty well. This is like, if I think about practice, a good third of our income is podcast sponsorships. Probably a third of our income is our membership communities, and a third of our income is one-on-one consulting. Then we're growing other areas like website design that people have asked for, or back-end support. For someone like myself, what would you say I should think through in regards to where to double down and where to cut back?
Well, if you've got 3 different things that are working, I mean, that's a manageable number. So you mentioned sponsorships, and what were the other 2?
Yeah, we have membership communities. So we have our Next Level Practice, Group Practice Launch, Group Practice Boss, where people pay a monthly fee to be a part of live events. We have courses, things like that. And then the one-on-one consulting between myself and our other consultants.
Fantastic. And is that one-to-one consulting like a more expensive back end to the membership, or are they completely different?
Yeah, so it's definitely more expensive. So it starts at around $1,000 a month, whereas our membership communities are between $150 and $250 a month. But then anytime someone levels up, they get access to the things below it. So if someone's doing consulting, they get access to all the membership community, or they get discounts on the back end support.
Yeah. So what you've got there with that model is something that works. And the reason you know it works is because it's got you to where you are. And so following the kind of process that I mentioned earlier, probably it's more a question of what you don't do at this point. So remember when I said that a lot of people, when they get to low 6 figures, they start to diversify and they start to add lots of new things on. Um, this is why I would say that it's it's going to be more powerful to focus on the things that are already working than it is to start to add on, little. It's very easy to add on little things like offering website design and things like that, but all of these extras that you add on will become much more will become problems later on, because they'll create all this complexity. So to my mind, and this is, just from on a very surface level understanding of what you offer, the business model itself, you've validated it, it's very solid. So I wouldn't be looking to change that at all. The usually the best thing to do would be to add on an even more expensive back end, so that you have a way for your best customers to continue to do business with you with more expensive levels. But beyond that, the business model sounds pretty solid to me. So then I'd be looking to the traffic, and I'd say, right, without changing the business model, how can I double our number of customers? How can
Mm,
I 10x the number of customers? Because if the business model is solid, then it's a marketing problem at that stage. And so you just want to look at the front end and say, right, I've got the podcast. How do I double the podcast? Now, you've been
mhm.
doing the podcast for a long time. You're coming up to 1,000 episodes, which is fantastic. So this may be the point which you're saying, okay, if I think that I've maxed out what's possible with the podcast, maybe it's time to start to look at a new traffic stream. So maybe we start to do YouTube. Maybe we start to do I don't know, it could be anything. It could be live events. Maybe we start doing direct mail campaigns, partnerships, things like that. It sounds to me like the path to growth is going to be on the front end traffic side, rather than continuing to add new things onto the business model.
So once things get going, you find your niche, you grow it, you test out some different products, you find the ones that are really working. Once that's clicking along, really it then becomes the front end traffic side of things of getting folks into your funnel.
It's exactly. It's very easy to continue to build new products, because if you've got a customer base, then the most tempting thing is to say, well, if we make a new product, we can sell it to our audience, and it will make some money. I know this because I spent years doing it, and what I realized is that there comes a point where you've made so many different things that each thing you make becomes its own little business in a way, and each thing that you make needs its own support. So your membership site needs its own support team, its own fulfillment team. Your one-to-one stuff needs its own fulfillment, and they will need their own marketing tracks as well. So most successful businesses, if you look at 7-8 figure businesses, they usually just do one thing really well, and the thing that's helped them to get to the higher scale is marketing. The other part to this is that marketing is usually by far the hardest part. If you are an expert, which everyone listening to this is, the product is the easy thing. We can all, whether it's therapy or music or language teaching, we can all do the thing that we do with our eyes closed all day long. And so it's a temptation to just continue to focus on that thing, making lots of new products because we can. The hard thing is marketing. And yet marketing is how you grow a huge business. The reason that Coca-Cola is a huge business is because they have tens of millions of people buying their stuff. And so it's precisely because marketing is so difficult and so unnatural to us as experts or artists of any kind, that really, if you can acknowledge and admit that marketing is a weakness, then leaning into that, learning it, and focusing on marketing is the thing that's going to bring you bigger results further down the line.
Mm. Yeah. Now, when you think about continuing to scale and get in front of new audiences, how do you think through that?
Yeah, so I've been through this phase many times inside story learning over the years, and I tend to have a very straightforward way of doing it. And this, I think I first started doing this back in 2018 or so, when we started to think about adding new channels. So we grew story learning initially with a blog, and then we added the podcast, and they worked really well. But once we were 5 or 6 years in, we were thinking, okay, it is time for something else. But you don't know what that thing is necessarily. So what I like to do is I like to come up with my best 3 ideas for growth. So I think in my case, it was the three things I was thinking of back then were: number one was a YouTube channel, number two was expanding our affiliates, and number three was, I'm forgetting what number three was. Let's just say virtual summits. That wasn't what it was, but it was those were the kind of three hypotheses. So I could start a YouTube channel, I could really build out our affiliates, or I could start to run virtual summits for our space. What I would do is say, right, I want to give each of these three things the best chance of life. And so I'm going to fully resource them, give them the budget that they need, make sure that we have enough team to actually execute on it, and give each one of these three things a full year of focus. So I'm really going to go for a YouTube channel for a year. I'm going to try and I'm going to hire someone to bring on lots of new affiliates. I'm going to go and run 2 virtual summits over the course of the year and hire an agency to execute on them for me. Give them the budget, give them the resources, execute on all 3 of them, and then let time do the rest. Because after that year, you're going to be able to look back on the year and say, right, I tried 3 things, but it was only the virtual summits that worked, for example. And YouTube just isn't showing signs of traction. The affiliates aren't working, but those virtual summits, man, they brought in tons of new leads. So at that point, you then very aggressively cut the 2 that didn't work and then double down on the third one, the one that did, and then that becomes the new thing. That's far more appealing to me than putting all your eggs in one basket with something that you don't know whether it's going to work or not. So it's this idea of having a few different options, putting them out there in the world, in the real world, and then waiting to see which of them develops traction, get that feedback from the real marketplace, and then double down on the one that works and cut the rest.
So good. Olly, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that the thing that they have spent years learning, becoming an expert in, is by far the most valuable commodity and the most valuable asset that they have. And there are many, many bright versions of the future that can be created just off the back of this speciality and knowledge that you have. I know this because I was quite good at language learning, which is I mean, that's great. But if you are actually solving people's problems and helping people, then it's a far more powerful thing. So I would say that I would want people to commit to becoming the best in the world at that one thing that they do really well, and spending the next 5 to 10 years building a brand that showcases that expertise in the most authentic way possible. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to know exactly what the pathway is going to look like. But if you go out there and authentically help people and create content and services and products that help people over the course of time, then it will create a life for you that could well be beyond anything you can imagine right now.
So awesome. Well, Olly, if people want to connect with you, if they want to follow your work, where should we send them?
Yeah, well, I have a newsletter at ollyrichards.co. That's OLLYRICHARDS.co. And if you join the newsletter, I've actually written a 117-page case study of my language business, Story Learning. It breaks down how the whole business works, from the products to the marketing to the mindset to the finance, and even some thoughts on lifestyle and kind of managing your own mindset and emotions as you scale your business. So it's completely free, and that's available for everyone who joins the newsletter. You can also find me on Twitter and YouTube as well. If you just go and search Olly Richards, you'll find me there. And that's how to connect with me.
So amazing. Olly, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, whether you are just getting started or you are growing a mega group practice and looking to do online courses and work or podcasts, we have trainings next week for you. Our Level Up Week is totally free. It's going to be all week long, Monday through Thursday. We're doing 3 to 4 webinars a day, all live. You can register over at practiceofthepractice.com/level up. So make sure you do that so that you can get those recordings. You can hang out with us. We're going to be doing a bunch of bonuses as well. And at the time of this recording, we have about $20,000 in prizes that we're giving away. So that number may grow after the time of this recording. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Thank you for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.